Something very disturbing happened in Yuba County on the night of February 24th, 1978. A group of five young men who were all a part of this program for the mentally handicapped attended a college basketball game at a university in the state of California. Five men, all from the Marysville area in California. You had Jack Hewitt, you had Gary Mathias, you had Ted Ware, William Sterling, and of course Jack Madruga. And since these men were mentally handicapped, they were highly anticipating their Olympic basketball tournament that was scheduled for the following night in Sacramento. But on this night, they thought they would attend this basketball game to get them pumped up and enthusiastic for tomorrow's game. Because if they won the game, they would win a trip to Disneyland in California. So they were very excited. And before they left, they neatly laid out their basketball jerseys on their beds. But this, of course, is where the story makes a grim turn, because these five friends would never make it to the following game in Sacramento. After the game in Chico, California, these five men drove back home, or supposedly drove back home. They all climbed into Madruga's Mercury coupe and drove to the local convenience store in downtown Chico. And it was here they had purchased snacks and drinks and anything else they would need for the drive back home. This was right around 10 p.m. or so, right after they left the store. And this is where most people, friends and family and colleagues, lost track of these five men. Nobody had any idea what happened to them. It's as if they had simply just drove off and vanished. Now here's the crazy thing. Their car was found abandoned around 70 miles away on a Plumas National Forest road. It appeared as though these men had somehow turned off a freeway on the way driving back home, heading eastbound rather than heading south. After law enforcement and investigators took time to check out the surrounding area and the scene at hand, there was no evidence of foul play. And in fact, they had ruled out anything ever happening maliciously to the boys, and it seemed as though these men had got out of the car on their own accord and just disappeared. It was also evident that the car did not break down, which would again result in them abandoning the vehicle. There was evidence of candy wrappers all over the car from the other night, from when they had hit the convenience store after the basketball game. Now, the area in which they were found was also a little disturbing because the environment around it was not very forgiving. For example, they were about 4,400 feet up in elevation and surrounded by deep snow. If these men had completely abandoned the car and gone wandering in the woods for whatever reason, whether it being driven out or they just wandered off, chances of survival were not looking good at this point. And these men were wearing very minimal amounts of clothing. And for them to try and traverse this terrain, I mean, not only is it cold with snow, but it's very, very dense. And in fact, on some of these places, you can only get to on horseback. And even though we're talking about mentally challenged men here, according to their friends and family, just them getting up and heading the wrong way and abandoning any shelter, aka their car, is completely out of character. It didn't actually add up for them to just vanish. It's even more strange because they were very pumped up and excited about their upcoming basketball game in Sacramento. So something seemed very off about them just mysteriously disappearing. In fact, Ted's mother, who claimed that Ted wouldn't have missed the game for anything, she was very disturbed by the findings. And they would have no reason, none of the five men, to drive up an isolated, unknown road in the middle of nowhere in the middle of the night to then just abandon their car for no reason. The other mothers agreed and were wondering why their sons did not just come back the way they came, and that something had to have interfered with their travel. And as a matter of fact, several of the men in the car were actually afraid of the dark, which makes the whole situation even more strange, as well as Sterling and Ware absolutely hating the cold weather and the outdoors altogether. So even though the investigation found no signs of foul play, it's easy to understand why that was suspected. Then the theory arose that they had stopped to maybe help somebody who needed it, and this person or peoples took advantage of them. But apparently, a witness by the name of Joseph Shawns had come forward telling police and authorities that he had seen this Mercury coupe coming through the area between 11 p.m. and midnight. Apparently, while on the same stretch of road, had gotten his car stuck in the snow, and while trying to get the car out of the snow, suffered a heart attack. Fortunately, it wasn't fatal, but in the midst of him needing help, he can see two headlights appearing behind him and then stopping roughly around 25 to 30 feet behind. But his version of the story is that these men pulled up in their Mercury coupe, got out, and then got in a secondary vehicle and drove off, dividing the party in two and three. But he says that could be incorrect because he was half conscious, hallucinating, and in excruciating pain, but firmly stands by the fact that the car he saw was indeed a Mercury coupe. Shortly after that, Another female witness came forward who claims that she had seen all 5 of these men in a 1950s red pickup truck right around 2 p.m. on the 25th of February. In fact, she went on to further state that she had seen all 5 of these men in a store right outside of Brownsville, roughly about an hour away from where the Mercury Coupe was originally found. Now, unfortunately for investigators and searchers, a huge blizzard storm had swept through the area shortly after the abandoned car had been found, hindering all search efforts and covering any potential foot tracks they could find. But still, countless search and rescue teams from the surrounding counties, including Yuba, joined in on this search around the mountain on foot, on horseback, and with canines to try and find these 5 missing men. While completely exhaustive and several weeks into the search, without finding a trace of anything, it was then suspended. And at that point, the Yuba County Sheriff's Office declared that they would now suspend the search unless new evidence came forward that indicated the search was still worth pursuing. Choppers, however, still persisted looking for these missing men, and even Yuba County Sheriff Jim Grant had said that we had searched every possible place, every nook and cranny just looking for these guys, and we could not find a thing. And within a couple of weeks, the case went cold until 4 months later, when the snow began melting and it revealed what exactly happened. Only 19 miles away from where the Mercury Coupe was originally found, they had noticed that the window was smashed and inside there was the decomposed body of Ware. It appeared he had suffered from severe frostbite and his legs had gained green. Now, along with his body, they had found ample amounts of food, books, clothing, and even matches and fuel, all of which were completely untouched. In fact, there was enough food to make sure that all 5 men were fed for well over a year. So, what happened? Well, it was determined that Weir had remained alive for up to 2 months in this trailer that these motorcyclists had found before somehow dying of starvation and hypothermia. As spring set in more and the snow began to retract and thaw, this uncovered the bodies of Madruga and Sterling, found only about 11 miles away from the abandoned Mercury Coupe. Like the other man, both of them had perished from hypothermia. Hewitt's father, who had joined in on the search, found his son's remains only 2 miles away from this trailer, and investigators believe that Hewitt had been in this trailer with Weir when he had passed, and after becoming scared and confused and not sure where to go, actually fled from the trailer to get away from this now decomposing body. And with 4 bodies found, nobody ever found out what happened to Matthias. While the ending to these 4 or 5 men was dark and grim, it led to even more questions than answers. Like, why would they walk more than a dozen miles uphill through deep snow instead of simply going downhill or remaining in their car, and what happened? And also, why would one of them live for more than 2 months in a Forest Service trailer, yet ignore the food, clothing, and fuel all around them before finally perishing? Nothing made sense when you look at all the details, and there's something that is really missing here. But apparently, the family's belief is that someone or something forced these men up there, forcing them up that mountain road, and ultimately led to all 5 of them perishing. Even now to this day, nobody knows the answers or why this happened, but their case is definitely mysterious. Andrew Mackie, a man of Scotland in the 17th century, in the Rarick area of Cub, Wrightshire. You see, at the start of February of 1695, Mackie would awake several mornings to discover that his livestock had been loose, and they were roaming freely on his land. Although he was pretty sure that he had secured them the night before, this was still going on and he couldn't figure out why. And so as the day and weeks and months wore on, he would then sometimes discover animals being tied up at random places, not the same where he had tethered them up the night before. So this wasn't making sense to him. And so one night, the entire Mackie family was awoken by this smoke from a stack of burning peats. Somehow, somebody set this peat on fire. Andrew wasn't exactly sure what to expect or what to think. He figured maybe it was a prankster, but those suspicions were soon put to rest the following month afterwards. Stones began appearing out of thin air and being thrown at the house, often hitting and striking members of the household, and common objects would vanish mysteriously without a trace and then reappear in other random places that had been previously thoroughly searched, adding more to the fright and confusion. There was definitely something supernatural going on here, and Andrew was practically backed into a corner, forced to believe this. Desperate and unsure of what to do next, he calls up his local minister for help. And of course, once the minister came to the property, he found nothing unusual going on and basically gave Mackie the green light saying, yeah, it's all in your head, there's nothing going on. In fact, it went even further because he kind of insulted Andrew, telling him that this was all just due to an overactive imaginations and that whatever he was experiencing is all in his head. And here's where it gets funny, because after he gets done berating Andrew, basically, he turns to leave the house, and wouldn't you know it, one of these stones, right, which supernaturally flew up off the ground, struck this minister several times. If that's not enough evidence for you, I don't know what is. And so I think at that point, he finally believed Andrew. So, around April, him and some other ministers gathered around and held an all-night prayer vigil. But even that was interrupted by these stones flying through and hitting and striking ministers and other members of the family. The ministers and members of the Mackie family felt completely hopeless and confused as to how to stop this strange supernatural problem. Well, later in that same month of April, the mother of the Mackie household had actually found a loose stone in the house's doorway. And so she takes it, picks it up, and discovers that there were 7 small bones with blood and flesh. Apparently, doing this only intensified the haunting or the attack from these spirits even more so, tenfold. This activity increased to the beginning of May, where the building that housed the family sheep actually burned to the ground and was apparently the final act of this spirit. Now, apparently the minister in this situation was so shocked and disturbed that he wanted to jot down his experiences in a booklet, so in 1696, he jotted all this down, and there was even 14 eyewitnesses to corroborate details. Some included fellow ministers, and others included fellow members of the Mackie family, all to confirm the accuracy of his own account. Unfortunately, no explanation was ever found for the events at Rarick, and the house was eventually abandoned and, well, fell to ruin after a time. Fast forward almost 200 years, and a visitor to this site in 1876 found it, but it was only marked by a few old fir trees, proving that there is virtually nothing left. Today, well, we have no idea what stands there, but probably nothing where it should remain. The McStay family of Fallbrook, California surprised many when the entire family just mysteriously disappeared. The McStay family was Joseph, who was 40, his wife Summer, who was 43, and their 2 children, Joseph Jr., age 3, and Gianni, age 4. And somewhere in the early morning hours of February 4th, 2010, this family had suddenly jumped into their SUV and left home, never to return, which is very odd. Once investigators and authorities began to search the home, they could find no traces of foul play or anything that they would actually be running from that would cause them to just get up and leave. But by seeing how it happened, the family clearly left in a hurry, like a life-threatening hurry. There was even a carton of eggs that were left out on the kitchen counter and 2 child-sized bowls of freshly popped popcorn just sitting there on the sofa. So what had driven them out of their homes so quickly? Even the dogs were found in the house and completely unharmed. While even today, nobody has any answers, but there are some very interesting clues. For example, on the evening of February 4th, Joseph McStay had actually had a call from his phone to his business associate, a guy by the name of Chase Merritt. But the call was unanswered because Merritt was apparently in the middle of watching a movie. In fact, the very last use of the cell phone was a ping received by a tower in the Fallbrook area on that very same day. However, judging from some clues found on the family computer, it appears the family might have left for Mexico, because there were some searches like what documents do children need for traveling to Mexico and Spanish lessons. So it seems that for some unknown reasons, life-threatening possibly, the family had up and left to Mexico. In fact, there's even some supposed CCTV footage of a family resembling the McStays going over the border in a van, but due to the poor quality of the footage, they can't actually say for sure, but it is very strange. What's also interesting is that the McStays had not withdrawn any money from their bank accounts and just left them virtually as is. So if they were planning on a long trip, especially to now go live in Mexico, don't you think they would have taken that money with them? And that money still sat there after a time, which means they still never even tried to withdraw any money. Then it was discovered that their SUV had been found abandoned near the Mexican border on February 8th. The car, which was found completely abandoned at 5:30, was then eventually towed at around 11 p.m. and showed no signs of forced entry, or anything taken out of the car. And from that point, it was a dead end for authorities. No trace or signs of the family could then be found. And since then, this case alone, as disturbing as it is, has been featured on many shows and segments, like America's Most Wanted, Unsolved Mysteries, Nancy Grace, etc. Of course, theories and speculations arised, and everybody had all sorts of ideas and supposed theories as to what happened to the family and where did they go. People even claimed they had seen them in Haiti and the Dominican Republic, but again, it's all hearsay. Others believed and theorized that they had somehow tampered with business of the cartel, and for whatever reason had fled to Mexico to evade them. Doesn't really make a lot of sense. Remember, it's just a theory, but a theory I don't quite understand. Now, it's very possible the family could have been taken care of if it was indeed cartel business they were interfering with. Or perhaps the family is still hiding in secrecy, escaping an unknown threat from these states. And while the McStay family to this day just ceases to exist at all, there has been a lot of suspicion on Joseph McStay's business partner, the man himself, Chase Merritt. He, of course, was the last person to even contact Joseph and anyone of the family, but he was also the last to have seen them alive. But it gets a little deeper, because Chase also had a criminal past and had several felony convictions for receiving stolen property, burglary, and other things. Chase himself even admitted to authorities that he had spent time with the family shortly before they had vanished, but denies having any involvement in their disappearance and even subjected himself to going through a polygraph test, which he passed. But I'm sure many of us watching this already know that it is pretty easy to fake a polygraph test. And in fact, many believe that Chase had nothing to do with their disappearance. And for several years on at that point, this mystery, this disappearance just became more and more perplexing until November 11th, 2013. A motorcyclist in the desert near Victorville, California, had happened across two shallow graves out there in the middle of nowhere in the Badlands, and the graves actually held the remains of 4 bodies that would then be confirmed as being those of the McStay family. Further analysis of these bodies seemed to show that all 4 members had died of severe blunt force trauma to the skull, likely by a sledgehammer, which was found actually resting along with the bodies, whereas Joseph's skeletal remains were actually found with an extension cord wrapped around the neck and in a white towel. So it was then suspected that Chase indeed had something to do with the family's death. And then there was all sorts of theories, like the fact that Chase was this degenerate gambler who had wanted to take out the family and take their money, but again, it's more theories. And even now in 2022, there is no solid link that can connect Chase and the family's murder. And as a matter of fact, as if the plot isn't already thick enough, there is a lot of theories and speculations that those 4 bodies dug up weren't even the McStays, and that the whole thing was staged to throw off the trail. There are several that believe the McStays are still done in Mexico, keeping quiet, living out their new lives with new identities. While there is another sect that believe that those bodies were the McStays, and that Chase Merritt really did have something to do with their death. One thing is for sure is that there is no concrete answer to the whole case, and it still remains a mystery to this day.